The alarm blared through the room, a relentless, shrill sound that ripped through the quiet darkness. Maya's eyes snapped open, heart pounding, as the reality of the situation hit her like a cold wave. She was late, very late. The envelope, still lying on the coffee table, was now at the forefront of her mind, its weight heavier than the seconds ticking away. She could feel it, the pressure, the clock, ticking down to the most crucial meeting of her life. If she didn't show up in the next 15 minutes, the opportunity would be gone. The promotion, the recognition, the chance to finally prove herself to her colleagues, it would all slip away, like sand, through her fingers. But then, as her hands trembled over the buttons of her shirt, another thought clawed at her mind. The envelope. Why had she received it? And who had left it? She hadn't recognized the handwriting, yet it was undeniably addressed to her. The message it contained, a cryptic warning, kept repeating in her head. Your time is running out. Don't let them win. Maya could feel the knot tightening in her stomach. Was it a threat? A prank? Was it connected to the decision she was about to make in that meeting? The consequences of what she was about to do were no longer black and white. As she grabbed her purse and dashed out the door, her breath shallow, her thoughts scattered, one thing became clear. She was standing on the edge of something much bigger than just a career choice. And soon, she would have to choose whether to dive in or walk away forever. Maya Turner was not one for drama, and her life had always reflected that. At 32, she had built a solid career in corporate marketing, steadily climbing the ladder with patience and hard work. She lived in a modest downtown apartment, far from the chaotic energy of her childhood neighborhood, but still close enough to her roots to feel grounded. Her days followed a predictable rhythm: early morning runs, hours spent in meetings, and evenings wrapped in the comfort of her routine. Despite her careful, measured approach to life, a certain restlessness had begun to settle in. It was as if some shift, was inevitable. The job that had once excited her had become a grind, the projects now a blur of spreadsheets and deadlines. She found herself yearning for more, but the more was elusive, an idea that felt distant despite her best efforts. Her circle of friends had always been small. There was Claire, her college roommate, who had moved into an entrepreneurial lifestyle, constantly hustling but never truly settled. Then there was Eli, her older brother, a steadfast presence in her life, who had recently become a father and seemed more concerned with his growing family than with the challenges Maya faced. But it was in her relationship with David, her boyfriend of 3 years, that the cracks were beginning to show. He was supportive, loving even. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were diverging. While she was stuck in a job that didn't fully satisfy her, David had already stepped into his dream career, one that allowed him to travel, create, and live fully. And so, Maya found herself at a crossroads. She was on the brink of something big, but she couldn't shake the thought that perhaps her biggest challenge wasn't about getting ahead in her career. It was about making a decision that would determine the very direction of her life. Would she remain in the comfort of the life she knew, or would she risk everything for a shot at something more meaningful? Maya had just stepped into the glass-walled conference room, her hands sweating as she adjusted the collar of her blouse. The presentation she had worked tirelessly on was ready, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The cryptic note, the envelope she'd found that morning, still rattled in her mind. Its message had been so unexpected, so direct, that it felt more like a warning than a coincidence. Your time is running out. Don't let them win. As she settled into her seat at the table, her manager, Jenna, walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Jenna's smile was tight, businesslike, but something was different in her eyes today, as if she had something to prove. She was holding a file in her hands. Before Maya could focus on anything else, Jenna dropped a bombshell. "Maya, I hope you're ready to step up," she said, not a hint of warmth in her voice. "The board has decided that you're the best candidate to take over for Sandra. She's leaving for personal reasons, and we need someone who can lead the team immediately." Maya's pulse quickened. She had been working toward this promotion for months. No, years, but not like this. Not with the weight of an entire team's future on her shoulders, not without warning. She had always assumed the transition would be gradual, that she'd be groomed for the position. The suddenness of it, left her reeling, and she could feel the eyes of the board members on her, waiting for her response. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, something in Jenna's demeanor shifted, a barely perceptible flicker of something more calculating beneath the surface. And that's when it hit her. The envelope. The note. This wasn't just a promotion. It felt like a test. A game being played. And Maya wasn't sure who was pulling the strings. The clock was ticking, the pressure mounting, and the weight of the decision was overwhelming. "Maya, are you with us?" Jenna's voice snapped her back to the present. The decision was no longer about her career alone. Something deeper was at play. And as she nodded, agreeing to take the role, a cold chill ran down her spine. Something was off. Maya barely slept that night, her mind racing with thoughts of the promotion, the envelope, and the strange tension that had been building around her. The next few days only deepened her sense of unease. The office was buzzing with excitement over her new role, but to her, it felt more like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Her first major task was overseeing a high-profile client pitch, something she had always dreamed of handling but never thought would come so soon. Despite the mounting excitement, the weight of responsibility felt like a heavy chain around her neck. She knew she couldn't afford any mistakes, but the more she dove into the project, the more the cracks in the plan began to show. The data didn't align, the client's expectations were vague, and her team, normally reliable, was distracted. Her first call was to Eli, her older brother, the one person she could trust to speak bluntly. He listened to her vent for a few minutes before offering his perspective. "You're putting too much pressure on yourself, Maya," Eli said, his voice a mixture of concern and calm. "This promotion's a big deal, but it's just a job. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Just breathe." But Maya's instincts told her that this wasn't just about her career. There was something more. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was hiding something. The way she'd looked at Maya during the meeting, the urgency in her tone, it all felt orchestrated. The promotion felt too easy, too perfectly timed. At work, Jenna's behavior continued to nag at Maya. She started receiving odd requests from her, ones that made no sense, like changing the presentation slides at the last minute or canceling meetings without explanation. Jenna's cryptic comments during their one-on-one meetings were becoming more frequent. "You're doing great, Maya, but be careful who you trust. Not everyone is on your side." Then, things started to get weirder. Maya found herself constantly bumping into people in the hallway, people she didn't recognize. And the most unsettling part? They all seemed to know her too well. One afternoon, while walking out of the elevator, a man she had never seen before said, "I hope you're ready for the real challenge ahead, Maya." It was as though someone was watching her, manipulating events from the shadows. The sleepless nights started to catch up with her, making it harder to think clearly. She tried to brush off the strange occurrences, telling herself it was all paranoia, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. David, her boyfriend, noticed the change in her as well. They hadn't had much time together lately, and when they did, the conversations always seemed to circle around work. "Maya, you've been distant," he said one night, after they'd barely spoken over dinner. "Is it just the promotion? Or is something else going on?" Maya didn't want to burden him with her growing anxiety, but she found herself snapping at him more often. "You wouldn't understand, David. You've never had to deal with the pressure of leading a team, not like I do." But David didn't back down. "I don't know, Maya, it feels like you're hiding something from me, like there's this thing you're not telling me." "What is it?" She tried to shake the feeling of impending danger, but the events kept escalating. The pressure was intensifying. At work, Jenna became colder, and the board members seemed to be watching her more closely. The clients were growing more demanding, and her team was becoming restless. Then came the phone call. The unknown number on her screen made her hesitate before answering. When she picked up, a voice she didn't recognize whispered through the line, "You're in too deep, Maya. If you want to get out, you need to act fast. Trust no one." Her breath caught in her throat as the line went dead. It was becoming clear now. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a trap, and Maya was caught in the middle. As the stakes rose, so did her doubts. Everyone seemed to have their own agenda, and no one could be trusted. Not even herself. The pressure was mounting, and Maya was running out of time. Maya had always prided herself on her ability to stay in control, to be the one who could keep her head above water no matter how turbulent the storm. But as the days wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that her sense of control was slipping away. The promotion, the envelope, the mysterious phone call, all of it was unraveling her. What she hadn't expected, however, was how much of her own flaws were now coming into focus. The fear had always been there, buried beneath the surface. A quiet, insidious voice that told her she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't cut out for the leadership role she had so eagerly sought. It had always been easier to push those feelings down, to hide behind the facade of competence. But now, in the midst of this chaos, those insecurities were rising to the surface, and she could no longer ignore them. Her need for approval had been the driving force behind her entire career. She had spent years trying to prove herself, first to her parents, who had never truly understood her career choice, then to her colleagues, who had often dismissed her ideas or taken credit for her work. She had pushed herself relentlessly, never giving herself the chance to pause and ask if she was truly happy. But now, in this moment of heightened tension, Maya began to realize that her pursuit of validation had come at a cost. It wasn't just the pressure of the promotion weighing on her, it was the weight of her past mistakes. The way she had sometimes chosen the wrong battles, neglected her relationships, or pushed aside her own desires in favor of career success. She thought back to her time with David, her boyfriend. They had always had a good relationship, but recently she had been so absorbed in work that she had distanced herself from him. She had let their connection fade into the background, all while convincing herself that her success at work was the most important thing. Now, the cracks in their relationship were more evident than ever. She had pushed David away with her need to win, and it hurt her to realize that she might lose him for good. And then there was the decision she had made to take the promotion, without fully understanding the forces at play. She had been so desperate to prove herself, so consumed by the need for success, that she hadn't questioned the timing, the suddenness, or the hidden motives behind it all. In her quest to prove that she could handle everything, Maya had ignored the warning signs, convincing herself that she could rise to the occasion. But now, as the pressure built, she wasn't so sure. Had she made a mistake? Had she sold herself into something far darker than she had realized? As the days passed and the tension continued to rise, Maya found herself wrestling with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She didn't have the answers. She didn't have control. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she could fix it. The cracks in her facade were no longer something she could hide. They were wide open for the world, and for her to see. Maya sat at her desk late one night, her head pounding from exhaustion. The once familiar office space now felt like a prison, its sterile walls pressing in on her. She had reviewed the client pitch one too many times, and still, something felt off. Jenna's cryptic warnings echoed in her head, but it was the phone call, the one from the anonymous voice, that had pushed her to the breaking point. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. There were forces at play, and Maya was deep in the middle of it. That night, as she stared at the glowing screen of her laptop, an email popped up from an unknown sender. It was a simple message. "You have one chance to get out. Leave before it's too late." The message wasn't signed, but it was enough to make her pulse race. Someone else knew. Someone else was trying to warn her. But who could she trust? The walls were closing in, and the decision she had been avoiding now loomed before her with terrifying clarity. She took a deep breath and clicked on the email, her fingers trembling. A set of encrypted files was attached. Maya hesitated. She had no idea what would be revealed by opening them, but it was clear that something far larger than she could imagine was happening, and the only way to regain control was to confront it. She downloaded the files, her mind racing. If she opened them, there was no going back. It was a gamble, but it felt like the only choice she had left. Maya stared at the folder on her desktop. For a brief moment, everything in her told her to back away, to walk out of the office and pretend this was all some terrible mistake. But she knew better. She had spent too much time ignoring the cracks in her life, pretending everything was fine. Now she had to face the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. With a shaky hand, she opened the folder. The screen blinked as the files loaded, revealing documents, encrypted messages, and names she recognized. Maya's heart sank. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was about power, manipulation, and secrets buried deep within the company. She had no idea how far it went, but she knew one thing for certain now. The path she had taken was leading her to something much darker than she had ever anticipated. She closed her eyes, her mind reeling. The decision had been made. She couldn't go back. And with that, Maya took her first step into the unknown. In the days that followed, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around her were closing in tighter with each passing moment. The encrypted files had revealed enough to make her stomach churn. A web of corruption that stretched through the very heart of the company she had spent years building her career in. But it wasn't just the documents that weighed on her. It was the growing realization that she had become entangled in something much bigger than herself, something she could no longer control. She spent sleepless nights sifting through the files, analyzing the names and connections. The more she dug, the darker it became. There were patterns she couldn't ignore, people she thought she knew, including Jenna, her boss. The company was involved in illegal deals, under-the-table agreements, and something far more sinister that she hadn't fully pieced together yet. Maya was now a key player in a game that she hadn't even known existed. She had been chosen, but not for her talent or hard work. She had been chosen because they needed someone who could be manipulated, someone who would do their bidding. It was during one of her late-night sessions, buried in her thoughts and papers, that her phone buzzed. A text message from David. "We need to talk." Her chest tightened. The last time they had tried to talk, it hadn't gone well. Their relationship had become increasingly strained as she became more consumed by the promotion, and she realized she had been shutting him out. Maya stood up, her legs weak with exhaustion, but she knew she couldn't avoid him any longer. She needed answers, from him and from herself. When she met David at the small coffee shop near her apartment, she immediately noticed the difference in his demeanor. He was quiet, distant, his usual warmth replaced with something cold. "Maya," he began, his voice low, "I've been trying to get through to you for weeks, but you keep pushing me away. I'm worried about you." She swallowed, knowing this conversation was long overdue. "I know I've been distant, but David cut her off, his eyes narrowing in frustration. Don't tell me you're fine, because you're not. You're not even close. You've been acting like everything's normal, but something is clearly wrong. I don't know who you are anymore." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had been so consumed by the chaos at work, by the increasing tension in her own life, that she hadn't noticed how much she had distanced herself from the one person who had always been there for her. The guilt gnawed at her, but there was no time to dwell on it. "I'm not the person I used to be, David," she whispered, almost to herself. "I've made decisions I can't take back. There's so much I haven't told you, but now it's too late. I'm in over my head." David's face softened, but he shook his head. "You're not in this alone, Maya, but you need to talk to me. I can't watch you do this to yourself. I won't." But Maya couldn't bring herself to tell him the whole truth. The company, the deals, the web of lies. She couldn't risk pulling him into this mess, not when she didn't even know where it would end. "I can't, David," she said quietly. "I can't drag you into this. I'm doing this for myself now." His eyes flashed with hurt, but he didn't argue. He stood up, leaving the coffee shop without another word. And just like that, Maya felt the last thread of her personal life unravel. Back at work, things were no better. The promotion she had worked so hard for now felt like a ball and chain, dragging her down into a pit she couldn't escape. Jenna's behavior had become more erratic, her demands more strange and secretive. It was clear that Maya was being pushed to the brink, but for what purpose? Was she supposed to be the fall person when things inevitably went wrong? Or was this all part of a much larger plan that Maya couldn't even begin to understand? One afternoon, just as she was beginning to think she might finally make a breakthrough, she received another mysterious email. The subject line was simple: "We know everything." She clicked it open with trepidation, and her heart sank as she read the contents. The email detailed her every move over the past several weeks, her meetings, her late-night work sessions, The phone call from the anonymous source, and worse, it threatened to expose her to the very people she had been trying to impress. They knew she had been snooping. They knew she was getting closer to the truth, and they were watching her every step. Panic set in. Maya closed her laptop, her hands trembling. She didn't know who they were, but she realized she had underestimated the danger she was in. They weren't just watching her, they were controlling the entire situation, and she was trapped in the middle of it. The stakes were rising by the hour, and the more she fought to regain control, the more elusive it became. As the pressure mounted, Maya started to question everything. Her career, her choices, and even her own sanity. She was being pulled in every direction, but each road seemed to lead to a dead end. The people she had trusted, the ones who had guided her, all had hidden motives. No one was safe. No one was as they seemed. A particularly cruel blow came when Maya's boss, Jenna, called her into her office one afternoon. The cold smile on her face made Maya's stomach twist. "I think it's time you knew the truth, Maya," Jenna said, her voice low and deliberate. "You've been playing the game, but now the real challenge begins." Maya's blood ran cold as she tried to make sense of Jenna's words. This was it, the point of no return. She had been a pawn, a tool in a game far larger than her understanding, and now that game was about to destroy her. As she walked out of Jenna's office, Maya felt a wave of despair wash over her. Everything was falling apart. Her career, her relationships, her future. And as the clock ticked down to the next big move, she had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was clear. She was no longer just a player. She was in the fight of her life. Maya stood at the edge of the rooftop, the cool wind whipping her hair around her face. The city sprawled out beneath her, a jungle of glass and steel, indifferent to the chaos that had swallowed her life. For the first time in weeks, everything felt numb. She had come here not to end things, though she wasn't sure what she was hoping for, but to escape the suffocating pressure that had been building, crushing her from all sides. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. The world had become too loud, too overwhelming. It felt like every step she took had led her to this point. Every decision, every lie, every secret she had uncovered. And yet, nothing had prepared her for how deeply it had all cut into her. The files, the manipulations, the anonymous threats, they had all culminated in this moment. The promotion, once the beacon of her dreams, was now a symbol of everything that was wrong in her life. The more she dug, the more she realized that there was no way out. Jenna, the board members, the mysterious forces controlling the company, they had trapped her. She was a pawn in their game, and the deeper she sank into it, the more she felt like she was losing herself. She had failed. David's words echoed in her mind. "You're not alone, Maya." But she was alone. He didn't understand. No one could. The people who had promised to help her had betrayed her, and the few she had trusted had abandoned her. The weight of the secrecy, the isolation, the guilt, it was all too much. She wanted to scream, to tear her hair out, to escape somehow, but every path seemed to close in front of her. There was no clear way forward, no way to undo the damage, no hope. She had reached the end, hadn't she? Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't about weakness, it was about survival. And right now, survival felt like an impossible dream. She wanted to turn away from everything, burn every bridge, walk away, and let it all fall apart. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Maybe she should just leave it all behind and start over. But could she? Was there even a way to start over when everything she had worked for was tainted? Maya's heart beat heavy in her chest as the cold air filled her lungs. She was teetering on the edge of everything she had ever known, and for a moment she couldn't see a way back. Maya's hands were trembling as she stepped into the conference room. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow, but she had made her decision. The message from Jenna had been clear. It was time to confront the truth, time to face the forces manipulating her life head on. But even as she walked towards the table, surrounded by the faces of her colleagues, the weight of the moment threatened to crush her. Jenna sat at the head of the table, her usual cool demeanor giving nothing away. The other members of the board sat in silence, their eyes fixed on Maya. She had seen their kind before, calculating, calculating, always calculating, but today they were something else entirely. Today they were waiting for her. She had the evidence, the encrypted files, the threats, the manipulations, all of it was in her hands. It was time to confront them. Maya placed a thick stack of papers on the table, the weight of each file symbolizing the years of lies she had uncovered. She didn't need to say anything right away. The silence spoke volumes. The game had shifted. She wasn't the pawn anymore. She was the one with the power. "What's all this, Maya?" Jenna asked, her voice silky smooth, masking the underlying threat. "This," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling in her chest, "is everything you've been hiding. The shady deals, the offshore accounts, the illicit contracts, and the blackmail. You thought I was too small to notice. You thought I wouldn't dig deep enough, but I did. I know everything." The room fell deathly silent. No one moved. The faces around her were unreadable, their expressions masks of calm that barely hid the panic beneath. Maya held their gaze, her eyes hardening with every word she spoke. "You didn't think I would see it, but I did. You wanted to control me, to use me. You thought I would just play along, keep climbing the ladder without asking questions. But I've asked questions. And now you can't hide behind your lies anymore." Jenna leaned forward slightly, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "And what do you plan to do with this, Maya? You're in no position to threaten us. You'll never be able to bring this to the surface." Maya's stomach churned, but she refused to back down. "Maybe not, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let you destroy everything I've worked for, and I'm not going to let you ruin any more lives in the process." The room seemed to close in on her, and just for a moment, a wave of doubt surged through her. Was she really doing the right thing? Was she just throwing away everything she had built? But then she remembered the anonymous message, the lies she'd uncovered, and the weight of the secrets they had forced her to carry. "No," Maya said, her voice rising with a newfound strength. "You've underestimated me. I'm not just a tool for your corporate games anymore. I'm not playing your game. This stops now." Jenna's smile faltered, and for the first time, Maya saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The walls that had seemed so solid, so impenetrable, were beginning to crumble. Maya reached for her phone and placed it on the table. The room watched her closely. "I've already sent this to the authorities, and I have a copy stored in multiple places in case you decide to pull anything." The tension in the room skyrocketed. Jenna's expression hardened, and she stood up, her voice sharp. "You think you can walk away from this, Maya? You don't understand what you're dealing with." But it was too late. Maya had crossed a line. The power had shifted. Jenna could feel it. Maya had taken control of her own fate, and that was more dangerous than any file, any deal, or any threat. "Maybe I don't understand everything," Maya replied, "but I understand this. You'll have to deal with me now, and I'm not backing down." Maya's breath caught as she walked out of the room, her heart still pounding, but a sense of resolve settling within her. She had stepped into the unknown, and no matter what came next, she was ready to fight. The days following the showdown in the conference room were a blur. Maya had done what she could. The authorities had acted swiftly, launching an investigation into the company's illegal activities, but the battle was far from over. In the midst of the chaos, the corporation's board members, those who had been untouchable for years, were slowly being peeled apart. Executives were arrested, and several of the company's major deals were canceled. It felt like a slow, inevitable collapse, but even in the wake of the corporate fallout, Maya found that victory didn't come without a cost. She had expected a sense of relief, but instead, there was only an overwhelming quiet. She had fought back against the powers that had tried to manipulate her. But what now? What did she have left? As the investigation dragged on, Maya continued her work in the company, though the landscape was shifting beneath her. Jenna, the woman who had once been her mentor, was eventually removed from her position. The facade of control that Jenna had so carefully constructed crumbled as her secrets came to light. It was bittersweet for Maya. She hadn't wanted to destroy Jenna, but Jenna's willingness to sacrifice others for power had left Maya no choice. Jenna's fall was swift, and the damage she had done was irreversible. Yet for Maya, it was a reminder of how far she'd come. She had started this journey as a woman desperate for validation, chasing success and power, willing to sacrifice everything for a seat at the table. Now, she had done something she once thought impossible. She had exposed the truth, and in doing so, she had taken control of her own life. The company had to rebuild. The culture would change, but Maya wasn't sure if it would ever feel the same. She had learned that climbing to the top could come at a steep price. The power, the validation she had once craved, no longer felt so important. She had uncovered truths about herself, about her weaknesses and insecurities that she couldn't ignore. The path to success hadn't led her to fulfillment. It had led her to betrayal and loss. Maya found herself reevaluating her future, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe. She made amends with David, though it wasn't easy. He had been hurt by her detachment, by her inability to truly be present. It took time to rebuild trust, but she was committed to it. They both had wounds to heal, but their connection was real, and they knew that it was worth fighting for. Maya also reconnected with friends she had neglected during her climb to the top. The friendships she had pushed aside when work was her only focus were slowly being rebuilt. It was a slow process, but it felt right. She no longer cared about the appearance of success. She cared about authenticity. She understood now that success wasn't about climbing higher. It was about finding balance, trust, and peace within herself. The company, though scarred, slowly began to adapt to the new reality, with an emphasis on transparency and ethics. Maya remained part of the new leadership team, but her role had shifted. She wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. She was a voice for change, a voice that had fought for something better. The promotion she had once believed would define her now seemed almost irrelevant. What mattered now was rebuilding what had been broken and rebuilding herself in the process. Maya had lost a lot, but she had gained so much more. She had learned to trust herself, to understand her worth without needing external validation. She had learned that success wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and the most important part of that journey was the person she became along the way. Weeks had passed since the investigation ended, and Maya found herself sitting on the balcony of her apartment, the city stretching out before her. The skyline glittered with the last light of the setting sun, the world moving on around her, indifferent to her inner transformation. She had made peace with the aftermath. The company was beginning its slow recovery, and though there were still many hurdles ahead, she knew the road ahead would be different, and so would she. David had been there with her every step of the way, quietly supporting her as she navigated the fallout. Things weren't perfect between them. They still had work to do, but they were no longer haunted by the unspoken tension that had once defined their relationship. Maya had learned that true intimacy wasn't about perfection, but about vulnerability, about showing up for each other, even when it was hard. Maya looked out at the city, reflecting on everything she had been through. She could have easily let the weight of the past break her, but instead, she had learned to carry it. It had shaped her into someone stronger, someone who no longer craved approval from others. She had found her own worth, her own voice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the evening breeze against her skin. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready for whatever came next. There was still uncertainty ahead, but she had learned that even in the most uncertain moments, there was room for growth. There was room for change, and there was room to rebuild. Maybe the answers weren't clear, but for now, that was enough. Maya stood up from the balcony, her fingers brushing against the railing, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. A tight knot formed in her chest. Hesitantly, she answered. The voice on the other end was familiar. Too familiar. "It's not over yet, Maya. We're just getting started." The line went dead, leaving only silence and the creeping suspicion that the battle was far from over. The city lights flickered below, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching. Some wars, it seemed, didn't end. They simply paused.